Where are you listening from tonight? Maybe you're lying in bed with the lights low, phone in hand, or sitting alone in your kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator keeping you company. Perhaps you're driving through quiet streets, headlights cutting through the dark. Wherever you are, imagine this with me. A small town, still waking from winter. The mornings are crisp, damp, carrying the smell of wet soil and wood smoke. My porch creaked the way it always did as I swept away the last of the dead leaves. My house has been quiet for years now. Too quiet, if I'm honest. Ever since my husband passed, the silence feels heavier, like it's settled into the walls. That's when I heard it. A knock on the door. Not quick or nervous, a steady knock, sure, like the hand behind it knew exactly what it wanted. I wasn't expecting anyone. For a moment, I thought about ignoring it. But curiosity has a way of winning. When I opened the door, he was there. Ethan, my neighbor. Or at least, that's how I'd always thought of him. The boy who used to ride his bike up and down the street, who carried boxes for his mother when she lived next door. Only now, he wasn't a boy. 25, maybe. Taller than me by more than a head, with broad shoulders and a quiet kind of confidence you only get from years of working with your hands. And in his hands, a bouquet of pale pink roses. "For you," he said. I must have looked shocked because he smiled, soft, a little crooked, like he'd caught me off guard and was enjoying it. "For me?" I asked. "What's the occasion?" He shrugged. "Do I need one?" Something in the way he said it made my chest tighten. I laughed, but it came out unsteady. Not usually, but it's not every day someone half my age shows up at my door with flowers. "They reminded me of you," he said, almost too quiet. And for a moment, I didn't know what to say. The silence between us stretched, thick, charged. The kind of silence where you feel your own heartbeat in your ears. My throat went dry. Finally, I stepped aside, gesturing toward the hall. "Come in. I'll put them in water." He followed me in. The sound of his boots on the old floorboards filled the house, filling the silence I'd been living with for too long. The house suddenly felt smaller, warmer, different. As I found a vase in the cabinet, I could feel his eyes on me. Not greedy, not careless, just steady, like I was worth looking at, worth noticing. "Your hair looks nice like that," he said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, certain. I turned, startled. "You're unusually charming today." He smiled. "Maybe I've always been charming. You just didn't see it." And that was the moment I realized something was shifting. I carried the roses into the kitchen, their petals brushing against my wrist like soft whispers. I found a vase at the back of the cabinet, one I hadn't used in years, rinsed it quickly, and filled it with water. My hands were steady, but my heart, it wasn't. He leaned against the counter, watching me. I could feel his gaze on my back, warm, patient, not the stare of someone greedy, but the attention of someone who saw me in a way I hadn't been seen in a very long time. "Your house is quiet," he said. I glanced over my shoulder. "It usually is." He nodded as if he already knew. Maybe he did. Maybe the whole street knew. After all, when you lose someone, your silence becomes louder than words. The roses slid easily into the vase, pale pink against the glass. I trimmed the stems, added a spoonful of sugar to the water, an old trick my mother taught me to keep them alive longer. Strange, isn't it? The little things you remember, the little rituals you cling to. When I turned back, Ethan was closer than I remembered. Not too close, just near enough to notice the faint smell of cedar wood clinging to him, the way his sleeves were rolled past his elbows, the roughness of his hands as they rested casually on the counter. He looked older in that moment. Maybe I just felt younger. "You didn't have to bring these," I said softly, fingertips brushing a petal. "I wanted to." His voice dropped, almost a whisper. "They reminded me of you. Strong, beautiful, a little unexpected." I laughed, but the sound trembled. "That's a dangerous thing to say to a woman like me." He tilted his head. "Why dangerous?" "Because words like that can open doors." "Then maybe it's time they did." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It pressed in around us, thick with things unsaid. My fingers gripped the counter to keep me grounded. He looked down then, not at me, but at my hands. My hands with their faint wrinkles, the veins that stood out just a little too much, the evidence of years of work and care. He studied them like they mattered. "I've been meaning to tell you something I've kept to myself too long." My pulse hammered in my ears. "What is it?" He swallowed. "The way I feel when I'm around you." The words hung there, suspended, changing the shape of the air between us. I should have laughed, brushed it off, pretended I misunderstood. That would have been easier. But there was nothing playful in his eyes. No arrogance, no smirk, just truth. Raw, steady, terrifying in its honesty. I leaned back against the sink, breath caught in my chest. "Ethan," he cut in gently, "don't have to say anything. Just think about it." And with that, he stepped back, his eyes lingering for a beat longer, then moved toward the door. The sound of it closing behind him echoed through the house, leaving me alone with the roses, alone with my racing heart. And for the first time in years, I realized I was trembling. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. The house was dark and still, the roses sitting on the counter like they were watching me. Every time I passed by, I caught myself reaching out, my fingers brushing the edge of the vase before I pulled back, as if touching them would make what happened earlier more real. And his words, they echoed. Think about it. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. It had been 3 years since my husband passed. In those years, I convinced myself that part of my life was over, the part where someone looks at you and sees more than your routine, more than the way you fold towels or clip coupons. I told myself I'd had my great love already and that the rest of my story was supposed to be quiet. But Ethan's eyes, God, the way he looked at me, it wasn't pity, it wasn't flattery. It was something steadier, something that felt like reverence. By morning, the roses had begun to droop slightly, a petal curling at the edge. I made tea,
wrapped myself in my robe, and sat on the porch with the mug warming my hands. The street was calm, as always. Birds at the feeder, the sound of a truck starting somewhere down the block. His truck. But when I looked toward his driveway, it was empty. He was gone. No rumble of an engine, no clang of tools in the garage, no sight of him. Maybe he regretted what he said. Maybe he realized it was all too strange, too complicated. Maybe it had been nothing more than a fleeting fancy. And maybe this stung. Maybe it had meant more to me than to him. The second day was worse. Restless energy pushed me through the house, from room to room, until I found myself in the kitchen pulling out ingredients. When I'm unsettled, I bake. Banana bread, always. The kind with dark chocolate chunks and cinnamon. My husband used to call it my thinking loaf. The smell filled the house, warm and solid, as if I could bake myself into calmness. But when the oven timer dinged, the silence was still there, heavy, expectant. That's when I heard another knock, softer this time, hesitant. I didn't rush. I peeled off the oven mitt, smoothed down my blouse, and walked slowly to the door. When I opened it, he stood there again, Ethan. No flowers this time, just him, hands tucked into his pockets, eyes searching mine with something careful, almost afraid. He said I was hoping we could talk. I hesitated. My heart said yes before my mouth did. Finally, I stepped aside. Come in. He moved slower this time, his boots quieter on the floorboards, as if he knew how fragile the moment was. I poured his tea without asking. He accepted it silently. And we sat across from each other at the table, steam curling up between us, filling the silence neither of us seemed ready to break.
We sat at the kitchen table, the steam from our tea curling into the air like smoke signals from a fire we hadn't named yet. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable exactly, but heavy with something waiting to be spoken. Finally, Ethan broke it. His voice was low, rough, like he hadn't slept either. I didn't sleep much, he said, staring into his cup. I looked up, surprised. His eyes were tired, but clear, steady. Me neither. He nodded, almost relieved, as if he hadn't wanted to be the only one haunted by the night before. I shouldn't have just dropped it on you. What I said, it wasn't fair to throw it out like that without warning. I folded my hands around the mug, letting the heat sink into my skin. You didn't drop anything, Ethan. You told me the truth. That takes courage. His head lifted, his expression softening. So you're not angry? I shook my head slowly. Confused, yes. Surprised, of course. But angry? No. The way his shoulders eased told me he'd been bracing for rejection. But he wasn't playing a game. There was no arrogance in him, no smugness, just sincerity. I took a breath. I thought a lot about what you said and about how it made me feel. He leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped on the table, waiting. I felt flattered and scared, and then flattered again, because it's been a long time since someone looked at me the way you do, like I'm not just a neighbor or a widow or someone's mother, like I'm still a woman, worth noticing. His eyes glistened, though he didn't look away. That's exactly it. You are a woman, a beautiful one, and you don't even realize half the things that make you so. My throat tightened. What things? He smiled faintly. The way you tilt your head when you laugh, the way you hum when you're focused, even if you don't notice, the way you carry yourself, strong but soft. I notice all of it.
The words landed deeper than I wanted to admit. Something inside me cracked open, like a dam I hadn't realized I built after years of silence. I looked down quickly, blinking hard. "You know how long it's been since anyone noticed those things?" I whispered. He reached across the table, not grabbing, not demanding, just extending his hand, slow enough that I could stop him if I wanted. When his fingers brushed mine, warm and steady, every nerve in me lit up. "I notice," he said simply. The silence that followed didn't need filling. We sat there, hands barely touching, breath shallow, hearts thudding in unison, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible.
He didn't stay long that morning, maybe an hour, just long enough for our tea to go cold and our silence to turn into something neither of us could ignore. When he finally stood, the chair scraping gently against the floor, I felt the absence of his hand before he even let go. "I should go," he said softly. "I didn't mean to take so much of your time." I almost laughed. Time? It had been years since anyone made me forget about time. He walked me to the door, though it was his leaving, not mine. And when he stepped onto the porch, he paused. The spring air was damp, carrying the smell of rain-soaked wood and blooming lilacs from the neighbor's yard. "I'll see you soon," he said, like a promise. Then, almost shyly, "if you want." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I just nodded, and he smiled before heading down the steps, his boots solid against the wood. I watched him cross the street to his house, the one his mother had left him. His back was straight, shoulders broad, but I saw the way he glanced back once, just once, as if checking to make sure I was still watching. And I was. When his door shut behind him, the quiet returned. Heavier now. My own door clicked closed, sealing me in with the scent of roses and the memory of his hand brushing mine.
That afternoon, I tried to busy myself. Laundry, dishes, even pruning the hydrangeas by the porch. But everything I did seemed to circle back to him. The way he said my name, the warmth in his voice when he told me I was beautiful, not in the way the world measures beauty, but in the way someone who really sees you might. By evening, I couldn't stand the stillness. I slipped on a jacket and went for a walk around the block. The air was cool, golden light spilling across the pavement as the sun sank low. Halfway around, I spotted him in his driveway. His truck's hood was up, tools scattered, a rag hanging from his back pocket. He was humming, low and tuneless, grease smudged across his shirt. He didn't see me at first, but then, like he could sense me, his head turned. Our eyes met, and that same smile spread across his face, quiet, unassuming, like it had been waiting just for me. "Evening," he said, wiping his hands. I stopped on the sidewalk, hugging my jacket tighter. "Car trouble?" He shook his head. "Not trouble, just keeping her in shape. Old engines need attention, you know?" I chuckled softly. "Sounds familiar." He tilted his head, amused. "Was that a self-burn?" "Maybe," I admitted. "Maybe I'm feeling brave today." He tossed the rag into the toolbox, stepped closer, and his voice dropped just enough for me to feel it in my chest.
I like you brave. And just like that, the walk home didn't feel like a walk back to the life I knew. It felt like a step into something entirely new.
He didn't ask me out, not in the way people think of asking. There was no nervous stumble, no rehearsed line, just a quiet suggestion that slipped between us the next evening as naturally as breath. "You free tomorrow?" he asked, wiping his hands on that same rag, grease still staining his fingertips. I raised a brow. "Are you asking me on a date?" That grin of his tugged at the corner of his mouth. "If you want to call it that, I was thinking coffee, maybe a walk by the lake. Nothing fancy." I hesitated. Half of me wanted to laugh it off, to keep safe behind the walls I'd built around my heart. But the other half, the part that had been restless since the moment he knocked with roses in hand, leaned forward. Finally, I said, "All right, coffee and a walk." The next afternoon, I found myself standing in front of my closet like a teenager, tugging shirts from hangers, rejecting one after another. Too dull, too formal, too much. I hadn't worried about clothes in years. Eventually, I chose a soft blue blouse that brought out the gray in my eyes, and a pair of slacks that still fit just right. I even curled my hair a little, dabbed on lipstick. When I caught my reflection, I almost didn't recognize myself. Not because I looked younger, but because I looked alive. He picked me up at 3. No flowers this time, no dramatic gesture. Just him at the door with that shy smile and a quiet, "You look beautiful." We drove with the windows down, spring air whipping through my hair, a slow, folksy song on the radio. I hadn't ridden in a truck with the windows open in years. It felt freeing. At the lake, families wandered the paths, children skipped rocks, ducks clustered near the shore. He guided us to a quiet bench shaded by tall trees, the water glittering beneath the late afternoon sun. We sat close, though not touching. The space between us was alive, humming. We talked about his work, how he dreamed of one day starting his own construction business, about his mother, how much he missed her steady presence and the way she believed in him. And then he asked about my husband. I hadn't expected that. Ethan asked, his voice gentle. "What was he like?" I stared at the water. Steady, kind, funny when he wanted to be. We had a good life. Not perfect, but good. "Do you miss him?" "Every day," I admitted, but not in the same way I used to. At first, I missed his presence, then I missed the routine. Now, I paused, swallowing. Now I missed the feeling of being known. He was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly his hand reached for mine on the bench, not demanding, just steady. "You deserve to be known again, not because of who you were to someone else, but because of who you are now." And I squeezed his hand back.
It's strange, isn't it? How a single touch can change the weight of your body. His hand on mine was nothing more than skin against skin, but it shifted something inside me. I felt lighter, or maybe steadier. I don't know. All I knew was that I didn't want to let go. We sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just listening. The rustle of leaves, the faint laughter of children across the lake, the rhythm of water lapping the shore. My thumb moved slightly against his, not on purpose, but like my body had grown impatient, waiting for permission. He noticed. His eyes flicked to me, warm and steady, no hint of mockery, just presence. And then he said the simplest thing, "You're easy to sit with." I laughed softly, looking down at our hands. That's not something people usually say. I don't usually say much at all, he admitted. But with you, it feels like I don't have to force it. The words hit me harder than they should have. After years of silence that felt heavy, the idea that silence could be comfortable again, shared, safe, was almost unbearable. When we finally rose from the bench, the sun was sinking lower, painting the water in streaks of gold and rose. We walked the path back to his truck, still hand in hand. I kept waiting for him to drop it, for the spell to break, but he didn't. At my door, he hesitated, not in the unsure way of a boy who doesn't know if he should kiss a girl, but in the careful way of a man who respects the weight of history. He stood there, close but not crowding, looking at me like I was something both familiar and brand new. He said, "I'll walk you in," though we both knew I was already home. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lavender from the candle I'd lit that morning. The evening light stretched long across the floorboards. I turned, and he was still there, waiting. Coffee again tomorrow? My lips curved without thought. Maybe dinner instead. That surprised him. His eyes widened, then softened into that smile I'd come to crave. Dinner, then. We stood too long in the doorway, not quite stepping apart, not quite stepping forward. His hand brushed my arm lightly, just once, like testing a boundary. My breath caught, not because I wasn't ready, but because I suddenly realized I was. And when he finally stepped back, murmuring goodnight, the air he left behind was charged, alive. I leaned against the closed door, hand pressed to my chest, feeling my own heartbeat like I hadn't in years. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the first touch of hope.
Dinner. Such a simple word, isn't it? But when you've eaten alone for years, the idea of setting a second plate feels like a ceremony. I spent the afternoon fussing over details I hadn't cared about in ages. The tablecloth ironed, candles placed but not lit yet, a roast chicken in the oven, vegetables seasoned just the way my husband used to like them. Not because I wanted to impress Ethan, at least that's what I told myself, but because I wanted to remember how it felt to prepare a meal for someone who might care. When the knock finally came, my hands trembled slightly as I wiped them on my apron. Opening the door, I found him standing there with a bottle of wine he admitted he didn't know how to choose. "The clerk said it was good with chicken," he said, sheepish. I smiled, taking it from him. "That'll do just fine." At the table, conversation flowed more easily than I expected. He told me about the jobs that kept him up at night, the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. I shared little pieces of myself too, the books that filled my quiet evenings, the garden that had become my sanctuary. Every so often, our laughter overlapped. It startled me each time, that sound. I hadn't realized how much I missed hearing myself laugh with someone else. When the chicken came out golden and crisp, he looked at it like I'd conjured magic. He asked as if I'd built a cathedral. "You cooked this?" "It's just chicken," I teased. "It's not just anything," he said softly, and for a moment I couldn't meet his eyes. We ate slowly, savoring not just the food, but the company. I watched him butter bread with those steady hands, and it occurred to me this man who had fixed my roof and brought roses was now sitting at my table, leaving fingerprints on my wine glasses, weaving himself into the fabric of my ordinary. After the plates were cleared, I brought out a pie,
Blueberry, my late husband's favorite. I almost didn't make it, afraid the memory would be too heavy. But instead, it felt right, like introducing two parts of my life to each other. Ethan took one bite and closed his eyes in approval. "If you keep cooking like this, I'll never leave." The words hung there, half joking, half serious. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with something else. Later, as we lingered in the living room, candles flickering low, he leaned closer, not to kiss, not yet, but to tell me something I didn't expect. He said, "I don't want to rush you, but I want you to know I'm here for as long as you'll have me." And in the quiet that followed, I realized the dinner table was no longer just wood and fabric. It had become a threshold.
You ever notice how silence changes at night? During the day, it's just absence. But at night, silence has weight. It presses closer, hums in the spaces between heartbeats, dares you to fill it with something braver than words. That's how it felt when Ethan lingered on my sofa, long after the plates had been cleared. The candles had burned low, tiny rivers of wax frozen mid-drip. His wineglass sat empty, his hand resting loosely on his knee. I could feel the question in the air, pulsing like a second heartbeat. Is this the moment? We weren't children anymore. There was no awkward shuffling, no clumsy laughter to hide behind. Just two people who had carried their loneliness long enough to know how rare it was to find comfort in another. His gaze found mine steady, unflinching. And then his hand moved, slow, deliberate, across the couch cushion until his fingers brushed the back of mine. I didn't pull away. I didn't even breathe. For a moment, that was all. Just the fragile contact of skin against skin, like testing the temperature of water before stepping in. But then he leaned forward, so close, I could smell the faint trace of pine on his shirt, the warmth of his breath mixing with mine. "You can tell me to stop," he whispered. I didn't. His lips touched mine, gentle, searching, almost reverent, the kind of kiss that doesn't demand but asks, "May I?" And when I kissed him back, it wasn't fireworks or thunder. It was something quieter, deeper, a door creaking open that had been locked for too long. My hands found his shoulders, steady and solid. His fingers slid carefully along my cheek, lingering like he was memorizing the texture of my skin. Time blurred, as if the world outside the walls no longer existed. When we finally pulled apart, the silence didn't press anymore. It softened, became a cocoon instead of a weight. He rested his forehead against mine, eyes closed, and I felt his chest rise and fall. "I've wanted to do that since the lake," he admitted, voice rough with honesty. A small laugh escaped me, shaky but real. "So have I." We didn't rush to kiss again. Instead, we sat there, holding the moment like it was fragile glass, the kind of moment you only get once before life tries to complicate it with questions, doubts, the noise of the world. That night, he didn't stay. He kissed me once more at the door, slower, deeper, a promise written in the press of his mouth against mine. And then he left, stepping into the night air while I stood inside, my fingers still brushing my lips as if to make sure the kiss hadn't been imagined. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a beginning. And beginnings, at my age, feel like miracles.
Mornings felt different after that night. You know how grief makes the air heavy, how even sunlight feels muted? For years, I'd woken to a house that held only echoes. But now, when I opened my eyes, there was anticipation instead of emptiness. Ethan didn't rush things. He never pushed. Instead, he showed up in small ways. A knock at the door with fresh bread from the bakery. A call just to ask if I'd eaten. The sound of his laughter in my kitchen when the radio played something silly. It was slow, deliberate, like weaving a new quilt from scraps of old fabric. Thread by thread, memory by memory. Neighbors began to notice, of course. A woman alone is invisible. A woman with company suddenly becomes a story. I caught their glances, heard the whispers, but for once, I didn't care. Let them talk. They hadn't seen me in the garden at dusk, hands trembling as I reached for Ethan's, only to find his already reaching back. One evening, we walked down to the lake again, the same place where it had all started, where his roses had caught me off guard. The water shimmered with the fading light, the air cool enough that I leaned into his warmth without hesitation. He stopped, turned to face me, and with that steady gaze that never flinched, he said, "I know you've lost before. I know your heart has carried more than its share. But I'm not here to take what was his. I'm here to build something that's ours." For a moment, my throat closed. How do you respond when someone offers you not just love, but respect for your past? My answer wasn't words. It was the way I kissed him, firm, certain, with gratitude and surrender all tangled together. From that day forward, love stopped being a ghost that haunted my halls. It became a presence, a hand brushing mine as we cooked together, his boots by my door, his laughter echoing in rooms that had been too quiet for too long. And I realized something. Love doesn't return as a thunderstorm, sweeping away what was. It returns as rain after drought, soaking into the soil you thought was barren. I still talk to my late husband sometimes, sitting in the garden, tending the roses Ethan once brought me. I tell him I'm okay now, that the loneliness isn't choking me anymore, that someone came along who doesn't erase him, but walks beside the memory of him. If you've ever wondered whether love is possible again after the world breaks you, let me tell you this. It is. It waits patiently. It finds you when you least expect it. And when it arrives, it feels both terrifying and beautiful. And sometimes it arrives in the form of a man with calloused hands standing at your doorstep with a bouquet of roses. Mornings felt different after that night. You know how grief makes the air heavy, how even sunlight feels muted? For years, I'd woken to a house that held only echoes. But now, when I opened my eyes, there was anticipation instead of emptiness. Ethan didn't rush things. He never pushed. Instead, he showed up in small ways. A knock at the door with fresh bread from the bakery. A call just to ask if I'd eaten. The sound of his laughter in my kitchen when the radio played something silly. It was slow, deliberate, like weaving a new quilt from scraps of old fabric. Thread by thread, memory by memory. Neighbors began to notice, of course. A woman alone is invisible. A woman with company suddenly becomes a story. I caught their glances, heard the whispers, but for once I didn't care. Let them talk. They hadn't seen me in the garden at dusk, hands trembling as I reached for Ethan's, only to find his already reaching back. One evening, we walked down to the lake again.
the same place where it had all started, where his roses had caught me off guard. The water shimmered with the fading light, the air cool enough that I leaned into his warmth without hesitation. He stopped, turned to face me, and with that steady gaze that never flinched, he said, "I know you've lost before. I know your heart has carried more than its share, but I'm not here to take what was his. I'm here to build something that's ours." For a moment, my throat closed. How do you respond when someone offers you not just love, but respect for your past? My answer wasn't words. It was the way I kissed him, firm, certain, with gratitude and surrender all tangled together. From that day forward, love stopped being a ghost that haunted my halls. It became a presence, a hand brushing mine as we cooked together, his boots by my door, his laughter echoing in rooms that had been too quiet for too long. And I realized something. Love doesn't return as a thunderstorm sweeping away what was. It returns as rain after drought, soaking into the soil you thought was barren. I still talk to my late husband sometimes, sitting in the garden, tending the roses Ethan once brought me. I tell him I'm okay now, that the loneliness isn't choking me anymore, that someone came along who doesn't erase him, but walks beside the memory of him. If you've ever wondered whether love is passable again after the world breaks you, let me tell you this. It is. It waits patiently, it finds you when you least expect it, and when it arrives, it feels both terrifying and beautiful. And sometimes it arrives in the form of a man with calloused hands standing at your doorstep with a bouquet of roses,